Hey everybody, how you doing today? Superfiend here, and welcome back to my Planet Coaster Theme Makers Toolkit series using Blender. Today we're going to be talking about texturing, and unfortunately I can't tell you everything there is to know about texturing in one short video. This is a topic that is going to span a few videos. Also, for the sake of completeness and for anybody who's completely new to 3D modeling, there are some segments of this video that are kind of step-by-step process that need to be completed in Blender just to get it set up for texturing. And so this video is going to be a little bit of a Blender tutorial and very kind of light on the texturing and how to control your textures and all the wonderful things you can do with textures. But if you bear with me, I do promise that when we get to future videos in the series, we will go more in depth into some of those topics that I know you really want to learn about, because when I started, I really wanted to learn about them too. But we kind of have to go through this very kind of light intro to texture bit first. So be patient, we'll get there. In order to texture our models in ThemeMaker's Toolkit, there's lots of little details that we have to get exactly correct. And I'm going to show a few of them to you right now. If we look at the ThemeMaker's Toolkit user guide under texturing and UVs, we can see here some important notes. The ones I want to call attention to are the texture dimensions, and this is measured in pixels. And essentially, your texture dimensions must be powers of 2, so 32, 64, 128. The maximum size is 2048 pixels. And it is possible to have non-uniform textures, which means that they don't have to be squares. You can have rectangular textures, but again, keep in mind the width and height of the textures must be measured in powers of 2. Now, if we come over here and look at our stone edging subfolder and we go into the package subdirectory, we can see I've added a new file called rock_bc.png. We'll get to the name a little bit later. But if we go ahead now and look at the preview pane, we can see that this is a rock looking texture. This is what we'll be using. And if we look at the details, we can see over here that it is 1024 by 1024, so powers of 2, and it is 2 megabytes in size. Now this is a little bit large for the purpose that we're intending to use it for. It would be in my best interest to scale it down a little bit, try to get that file size down, but that's not really the goal of this video. In order to use our texture in Blender, we need to create a new material or modify an existing material. We're going to go ahead now and right click our basic mesh right over here, and we're going to expand it in the outliner. And we can see here now that it is called hard_L0. It has a mesh called cube, and it has a material called material, and these are the textures that are part of the material. If we expand the next mesh down in the list, we can see that it has a material with the same name. So all of our objects in our scene currently are using this material called material. In order to modify this existing material, we're going to split our 3D view, and then we're going to split again. In the top, we're going to go ahead and pick the node editor. Nodes are only available when using cycles, so do make sure that you are in cycles render. In the bottom, we're going to pick UV image editor. Now over in here, there should be some nodes that we can modify, yet there are none right now. So we're going to go ahead and tick the box that says use nodes, and there they are. Nodes are various boxes that are connected by connectors or noodles, and we're going to left click on the diffuse BSDF and press X to delete it. With Shift A, we get a pop-up menu for add. We'll go to shader, and we're going to use a principled BSDF, and it follows the mouse and left click wherever you want it to drop, and then go ahead and left click and drag from the BSDF output to the surface input of the material. You can use the mouse wheel to zoom out a little bit and click down on the middle mouse button to move over to the right, and we're going to Shift A again, this time choosing texture, image texture. Follows the mouse again, left click to drop it, zoom in and recenter ourselves here. And we can left click and drag this little border here to make it bigger. And we're going to drag the color output to the base color input of the principled BSDF. Now we're going to open our texture. So we're going to go over here to our package subfolder. And here's our image rock_bc.png. And we'll double click and it's added to this image texture node. It hasn't appeared down here in the UV image editor. So we're going to go ahead now and whoops, wrong one. We're going to go over here where we have new and open, and we're going to click on that little pop-up, and we're going to choose the rock underscore BC, and there it is. Now it's very important that we give our material the correct name. So we're going to go over and look at it here in Windows Explorer again, and it's rock underscore bc.png. We're going to use this notepad file to pick apart this name. Okay, the end is the file extension. Hopefully you understand that. The underscore BC is a specific suffix that is defined by the Theme Maker's Toolkit and Planet Coaster. It stands for base color, which is the basic coloring of your object for the texture. Sometimes this is called an albedo or an albedo map. And then the rock is the material name. This is the name that we get to choose so that it has meaning for us, the model designer. So because we're making something that looks like stone or rock, I've called mine rock. The file name has to match. And then in here, under our material, we can highlight where it says material, type rock, and press enter. And we can see now in the outliner that all the materials have changed to be rock. And it's very, very important that your material name matches the prefix of your textures. With our material created and our texture visible in the UV image editor, we can UV map our model. UV mapping is the process by which we tell 3D software how to draw a flat image onto a 3D object. And in order to see it in Blender, we need to come over here and change our viewport shading to either texture or material. And I'm going to be picking material. We can also change our node editor to a 3D view and set it to rendered mode, and we'll get a much nicer view of the texture on our model as we do the UV mapping. Now we're going to go ahead and right click on our object and press tab to go into edit mode. And we're going to press A few times until everything is selected. We press U to get a UV mapping pop-up, and there are a few automatic UV mapping mechanisms built into Blender. We're going to be using Smart UV Project, and we're going to go ahead and change island margin and bump it up to 2 centimeters. When we click OK, the faces of our model have been cut and split apart into what are called islands, and there's a little space in between them. That little space was defined by the island margin. So we have our islands with little spaces in between, and now over here in our 3D views, we can see that our texture has been wrapped around our model. This is as complicated of a UV mapping we're going to do in this video. We're going to come back in a future video and go a little bit more in depth on this, but keep watching because you're going to see a couple things that are going to be useful. And also a quick aside, models exist in 3D space, X, Y, and Z space. Textures exist in 2D space, and their coordinates are usually called UV, and you'll sometimes hear them referred to as texture chords. Now over here we can press tab to go out of edit mode on this model. We'll select the next mesh and press tab. We press A until everything is selected. U, Smart UV Project, and then this mesh has been mapped as well. And we can go ahead and kind of scooch our view down over here, and we'll go ahead and move this one down so we can zoom in and look at the last one on the list. We'll press tab again, right click on the last mesh, press tab, A until everything is selected, U, Smart UV Project, and then now we can see that this one has been mapped as well. And it actually looks pretty decent. So we can zoom out now and see how they look. And all in all, it's pretty good. So the next thing we need to do is we need to transfer this texture mapping onto all of our different levels of detail. Because if you remember, the only ones that are currently visible are sub L0, hard L0, and bevel L0. These texture coordinates have not been applied to any of the other meshes that are currently invisible. So I'm going to show you how to do that next. Now we need to transfer the UV chords from our L0 levels of detail into all the other levels of detail. So the first thing we're going to do, working with hard L0, is we're going to toggle the visibility of these other meshes. Then we're going to left click on hard L5 and hold down shift and select upwards, clicking on hard L0 last. Over here in a 3D view, we hold down Control, Shift, and T, and then we select UVs. And what this will do is it will transfer the UV layers from the active object of the selection to all the other meshes. So again, Control Shift T, we transfer UVs. And now over here, if I turn off visibility of all these meshes, here is hard L0. And I'm going to go ahead and switch this to material so we can see it as well. And if I go ahead and make it invisible, we can see that each of the other meshes have the same UV coordinates as the one we started with. So now we're going to go ahead and go to bevel, and we're going to make everything visible. And we're going to left click on bevel L5. Now we hold down Shift and select upwards to bevel L0, Control Shift T, and transfer the UVs. And once again, if we make these invisible, we can see that it has been transferred to each of the meshes. We're going to go ahead now and finish this process with sub. Control Shift T, transfer UVs. And if we make them all invisible, we can now toggle them one by one and see that the UV coordinates have been transferred. Going over to our folder that has our project in it, we're going to delete the previous package.zip, and we'll go into the package and delete the previous stone edging. We don't have to do that, but sometimes I'm a little bit meticulous about those things. And then we go back over to Blender, and I'm going to show you another neat little tip. I've gone ahead and made all of our meshes visible. And recall that if you press A, it selects everything in the scene, and then we have to go back and like deselect the camera and the lamp. But there's another thing you can do. If we go over here to the camera in the outliner and we click the arrow and turn that off, and we do the same thing with the lamp. Now when we do Control A, it will no longer, or I'm sorry, just regular A, it will no longer select the camera or the lamp. And the only thing selected are our 16 meshes. So that makes it much easier to select all the meshes. And we'll come over here now to File, Export, FBX. And this is going to go into the Blender Stone Edging package subfolder, and it's FBX. And I have a preset now for a Planet Coaster, and it's set to selected objects. Scaling is 1, minus Z forward, Y up. Only the mesh is selected. Experimental, apply transform, and then nothing else through here is really done. And we're going to go ahead and say Export FBX. Set this back to Planet Coaster just to be sure. So now if we go back over here to Windows Explorer, we can see that we have the Stone Edging FBX is back. We can go ahead and right click, 7-zip, add to package.zip, and then we'll upload this through the Theme Maker's Toolkit as I showed in a previous video. Now when the Theme Maker's Toolkit website is done processing our model, you'll want to download it and replace the other one that we had under Documents, Frontier Developments, Planet Coaster, TMT, and you can see it's right here. It's about 2.5 megabytes, so I feel it's a little bit large for the piece of scenery that we are creating, and the way we would get the file size smaller is really by changing our textures. Smaller textures, a little bit less resolution on them, and that would help to bring down the file size. In any case, let's come in and look at our model in game now. So the textures are showing up the way we would hope that they would show up. It doesn't look entirely coherent or cohesive with the existing game textures. There's some things that we could try to combat that, and I'll defer that to a future video. And another thing I want to point out is that when we look at the other models in the game, we can see things like on this carving, it looks like it's slightly indented, and it looks like there's some slight indentations and things around here. And if we get in really close, it doesn't look like these are very smooth surfaces on top of the Planet Coaster models. Now when we look at ours look perfectly flat and perfectly smooth. And so the difference between their models and our models is that we are only using the single base color texture, whereas their models have other textures that are part of the material design. And it's the material design and the other textures that make your models look like they have all these slight 3D contours. Even though if we zoom in really close, this model, even though it looks like it's contoured on top from this angle, if you get really down, it's perfectly flat. It's not really contoured at all along the top surface. It's perfectly flat. Same thing with the road and the pavement. From up here, it looks like these are kind of slightly raised and then indented in between the stones. But when you get down and you look at it, you can see that it's not. It's all just an illusion. And when we come back in the next video, we're going to talk a little bit more about materials and those other textures that you add to your model to give your model all this extra 3D contouring information. And so we're going to do that when we come back in the next one. Let me know if you enjoyed this one or found it helpful with comments or thumbs up. I hope to see you in the next video, and thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.